Sometimes, the loudest rescues come from voices you can't see. Harrison Ford hadn't stepped into a cockpit in years. But that afternoon, inside a dusty control room tucked high in the Rockies, a young pilot's panicked voice pierced the radio. The room froze, and then Ford spoke just 4 words. "Let me try, please." No one moved, because some instincts never retire and some debts, they fly across generations. Before we begin, tell us where you're watching from today. And if this story speaks to you, don't forget to subscribe. The sun burned hot over the mountain ridges, casting sharp shadows across the tarmac of the National Guard Flight Training Base. Dust curled under rotor wash, and the wind howled between hangars like some restless thing. Inside the control center, the hum of radar and low chatter of flight instructors barely concealed the undercurrent of tension. This wasn't just another simulation. It was the final field exercise for one of the youngest pilots in the program, Lieutenant Jackson Miller, and it wasn't going well. "Eagle 2, adjust pitch. You're drifting off course," came the voice of the young controller, barely older than the pilot himself. His fingers danced over the radar console, eyes flicking to a screen that showed the training helicopter veering eastward out of its designated corridor. "Eagle 2, do you copy?" Static, then a voice shaky, on the edge of panic cut through. "I can't see the horizon. I think the instruments are off. I don't know which way's up." Inside the control room, heads snapped toward the primary console. An instructor leaned in, his voice tense. "Tell him to level out. Use the artificial horizon, not his eyes." "He's not responding," the controller muttered, tapping his headset. On the large wall monitor, the Black Hawk's marker jittered. Not a freefall, not yet, but if he didn't stabilize soon, it would be. Someone cursed under their breath. A lieutenant reached for the emergency override frequency. "We might have to initiate remote assist or prep a secondary lift." Then from the far corner of the room, a voice, calm, low, measured. "Let me try." It wasn't a command. It didn't need to be. Everyone turned. Standing near the secondary equipment rack was a man in a faded canvas jacket, sleeves rolled, gray hair tied back, eyes fixed on the screen. "Mr. Ford," said one of the techs, "this is restricted air traffic coordination. We are under protocol." "I know what protocol says," the man replied without looking away. "I also know that kid's about 30 seconds from losing lift altogether. Patch me in." There was hesitation. The controller looked to his superior, a subtle shake of the head. "He's not active duty anymore. He's a civilian consultant. He's not cleared." "I'm not asking for clearance," the man said. "I'm asking for a channel." The room held its breath. Another beat passed. Then an older instructor, Colonel Barnes, spoke quietly. "Give him the line." A few keystrokes later, the headset was passed over. Harrison Ford took it with the ease of a man who'd worn it 1,000 times before. He stepped forward slowly, speaking into the mic with no hint of panic. "Eagle 2, this is Charlie's station. You're not alone up there, son." More static. "I know your hands are shaking. Good, that means you care. Now look at your hands, not the clouds, not the instruments, just your hands. You're going to fly them steady." In the helicopter, Jackson's breath came in short bursts. His vision blurred, sweat strung his eyes. The voice, whoever it was, cut through the noise. It didn't bark orders. It didn't panic. It anchored him. "Pull back gently, Jackson. That's it. Keep your elbows in. Trim it like you practiced." How do you know my name?" the young pilot whispered. Ford's voice didn't answer that. He just said, "Because you matter, and right now I'm here." In the control room, radar stabilized. The icon for Eagle 2 steadied on the screen. A murmur ran through the crowd. The young controller leaned toward his console. "Sir, who exactly is he?" Colonel Barnes exhaled. "He used to fly, a long time ago. Then they grounded him after a crash, said he'd done enough. And now?" Now the colonel thought, "He's doing what no protocol could." Ford's voice crackled through the room once more. "Let's bring you home, Jackson." Inside the tactical radio room, the lights from the radar screen flickered against tense faces. The air smelled of sweat and dust, and the hum of electricity underscored the rising voices. "He's not authorized," snapped the young controller, standing rigid at his console. "He's not even active duty anymore." The senior technician looked at him, then at the man standing quietly in the corner, the one whose voice had just steadied the crashing heartbeat of a rookie in freefall. Harrison Ford didn't move. He didn't need to. His eyes stayed on the screen, watching every twitch of the blip marked Eagle 2. He's just a volunteer tech, the controller repeated, as if saying it louder made it true. Maintenance. Observer, not command. Someone else muttered, then why did the kid listen? Across the room, an older lieutenant, uniform wrinkled, hair silver at the edges, stepped forward. His voice was calm, almost reverent. If you'd heard him speak during a whiteout storm on Denali, when the winds hit 60 and we couldn't see past our noses, you wouldn't be asking who he is. The young controller hesitated. He was grounded, though, years ago. Some incident off-grid. We all get grounded eventually, the lieutenant said. What matters is what he still carries when the rest of us stop. Ford didn't interrupt. His voice only came through the headset, directed solely at the boy in the sky. Breathe, Jackson, slow and easy. Let the air pass through you, not over you. You're not fighting it, you're dancing with it. In the Black Hawk, Jackson Miller blinked hard, gripping the cyclic so tightly his knuckles turned white. His pulse pounded in his ears, but the voice didn't match the storm outside. It was calm, like water over smooth stone. Familiar even. Who are you? He whispered, though the cockpit was empty. Doesn't matter, Ford said. Just fly with me. Jackson exhaled. His breathing, ragged just moments ago, began to even out. The tremble in his hands softened. The helicopter's yaw steadied slightly. A technician watching the screen murmured, "He's coming back online." In the room, conversations stopped. No one breathed. Everyone just listened. The voice in Jackson's headset continued, gentle but firm. "Center yourself, trim the nose. You've got maybe 3 degrees left to bring her level. You're flying her, she's not flying you." Jackson didn't understand how the man knew. He hadn't reported those details. The instruments were glitching. But this voice seemed to see through metal, through wires, straight into the cabin, and into him. Then something struck him, the tone, the phrasing, even the way the man said his name. Jackson blinked. A memory stirred, something buried deep. A firelit living room, a younger version of himself sitting cross-legged on the carpet, listening to his father tell a story about a crash, about a pilot, a voice. "He told me," Jackson muttered under his breath, "he told me about you." Ford said nothing to that, just offered one more line. "You're not alone, son, and you never were." Jackson's hands moved now with control, not confidence, not yet, but focus. Fear didn't vanish, but it obeyed him now. In the control room, the senior lieutenant glanced at the young controller, whose hand hovered over the override. "You still want to mute him?" he asked quietly. The controller didn't answer. The radar screen glowed steady green. The wind still howled across the mountain passes outside. But inside the storm, something had changed. A boy was flying again, and an old pilot who no longer had wings had just helped him remember how. The rotor blades still pulsed above the mountains like a wounded heartbeat. Inside the cockpit, Jackson Miller gritted his teeth, sweat rolling down the back of his neck. The cyclic jerked slightly in his grip, the machine not yet trusting him, as if testing his will. Below, the canyons stretched like cracked earth, unforgiving and waiting. "You're doing fine," came the voice again, steady and sure. "Now ease her back just a notch, there you go." In the control room, Harrison Ford stood still, his hand resting lightly on the console, eyes closed for just a breath longer than necessary. The flicker of radar light washed over his face, but he wasn't seeing it. Not exactly. He was seeing something else. It was 1978. A younger man sat in the pilot's seat of a Bell 407, flying low across the wind-cut ridges of northwestern Wyoming. He wore no rank on his sleeve then, just a borrowed flight jacket and a map duct-taped to the panel. They'd lost contact with a group of geology students 3 days prior. Storm rolled in too fast, their emergency beacon failed, and no one else wanted to fly in the wind shear that swept down the Snake River Valley like a blade. But he went anyway, against orders, against common sense, and it nearly killed him. He remembered the sound of the warning alarms screaming in the cockpit, the sheer white nothingness outside his windshield. He remembered the moment the altitude indicator spun uselessly. Panic clawed up his throat. Then, just when he'd nearly shut down, a voice crackled into his headset. Calm, older, firm, it didn't give orders, it gave presence. You're not lost, the voice said. You're here, you're still flying. You just need to remember, he never saw that man, never got a name, never even found out which tower he came from. But that voice stayed with him. Long after the students were found, huddled near a rock outcrop, half frozen but alive. Long after he flew them back, alone, to base. Long after the debrief, the paperwork, and the commendation no one ever read. What remained was the voice. And now, nearly 5 decades later, he understood why. Ford opened his eyes. The radar showed Jackson's bird steadying inch by inch. Doing good, Jackson, he said into the headset. Keep your nose level. Let her ride the gust, don't fight it. There was silence on the other end, then a quiet breath. This ever happened to you? The boy asked. Ford's lips curled just slightly. Once, in a place not too different from where you are. How'd you get out of it? Ford paused, let the memory settle. Someone talked me through it, he said. Someone who didn't have to, someone who didn't need credit or rank or even a name, just a voice on the other end. In the helicopter, Jackson didn't respond, but he didn't have to. His hands moved with more purpose now, still cautious, still learning, but no longer paralyzed. The machine responded in kind, almost grateful to be flown by someone who'd begun to listen. Back in the control center, one of the younger techs leaned toward the colonel. He's mentoring the kid midair, he whispered. He's not just guiding him, he's giving him something else. The colonel nodded slowly. He's giving him what someone once gave him. Ford stared out the window now, not at the screen but past it, through the glass and beyond the ridges. Somewhere in the past, a young man had been saved by a stranger's voice. And now in the present, that young man had become the voice. The cycle completed, quiet, unseen, uncelebrated, but unforgettable. The descent was going well until it was. At just under 800 feet, the helicopter lurched violently to the left. A sudden updraft slammed against the underbelly like a fist. The instrument panel blinked red. Altimeter fluctuations, pressure drop. The bird was no longer gliding, it was fighting for balance. Inside the cockpit, Jackson gripped the controls as if trying to anchor himself to something that still obeyed him. She's going down, he shouted into the mic, voice cracking. I'm losing her, pressure's dropping, I can't stabilize. In the control room, the radar shifted erratically. The controller's hand shot toward the override panel. We need to intervene now, switch to auto-compensate, get a lock before he spirals. Do it, someone ordered, but before the command executed, a single voice cut through. Let him breathe, Ford said, quietly but firmly. I've got him. The controller hesitated, hand frozen above the override. The senior officer's eyes locked on Ford. You sure? Ford didn't blink. If we take this from him now, he'll never trust himself again. He lowered his voice into the headset, like talking to a wounded animal. Jackson, you're not falling. You're flying in bad company. Feel the machine. She's talking to you. Just listen. The whine of the engine pulsed in Jackson's ears. The pressure gauge flashed again. The frame shuddered. He could barely think. What do I do? He whispered. Tell me what to do. Ford's voice didn't rise. It slowed, measured. Shut down auxiliary hydraulics. Flip switch 3 left. Panel D. She's choking on her own systems. Go manual trim. Use your left foot. Just feel it out. You'll know when she starts listening again. There was a pause. Then, sir, that's not in any manual I've ever seen. Ford's voice was flat. It wouldn't be. Back in the control room, heads turned. Someone whispered, wait, that's old school stuff. Like Vietnam-era recovery protocol. No, said the older lieutenant, that's Ford-era. In the air, Jackson's fingers moved slowly, uncertainly, but followed the instructions. He flipped the switches, killed the auxiliary lines. The helicopter dropped 10 feet, then 10 more, almost skimming the top of the ridge. Then stabilized. Jackson gasped. The stick stopped fighting. It started listening. The helicopter responded. Still battered, still bruised by the wind, but under control. How did you know that would work? Jackson asked, breathless. Ford's answer came slow. because I had to do it once, middle of a canyon, crosswind. Half my dashboard fried from lightning strike, and I was alone. Jackson said nothing. He didn't need to. His silence was a kind of reverence. Ford leaned back slightly, not in triumph, but in quiet relief. He hadn't just saved a pilot. He'd given him a piece of the old ways, the kind of flying no longer taught, only handed down from voices you had to earn. In the room, no one touched the override again. Outside, the wind still howled against the ridgelines. But inside that cockpit, one young pilot had just learned how to fly through the kind of storm no manual could explain. And the man who guided him had done it with nothing but memory, instinct, and trust. The helicopter held steady now, riding the last of the turbulence like a wild animal, slowly learning its rider's grip. Jackson's breathing slowed, though every nerve in his body still tingled with adrenaline. His fingers loosened on the controls, but his mind was still racing. He looked out across the cockpit windshield, the sky stretching endless and open, no longer a threat, but something waiting to be understood. Then through the headset he asked it, hesitant, almost embarrassed, Are you the actor?" There was a pause, then a quiet laugh, not mocking, not surprised, just soft, like someone who had heard that question too many times in too many strange places. "Sometimes," the voice replied, "when I'm not flying." Jackson blinked. "Wait, you're actually Harrison Ford?" Another pause. "That's what they printed on the license, but up here, that name doesn't get you very far." The young pilot tried to process it. "But what are you doing here, in a control room?" "Helping," Ford answered, "the way someone once helped me." In the background, the control room remained silent. The moment didn't need commentary. On screen, the helicopter's path held straight, altitude steady, vitals stable. Jackson, still trying to reconcile the voice in his headset with the face from his childhood movie posters, gave a small, breathless laugh. "This is insane, I mean. I grew up watching you crash land and outrun things. I just didn't think one day you'd be the one talking me through a real one." Ford's voice didn't change. "Crashing on screen is easy. You get up, brush off the dirt, they call cut. Real life doesn't yell cut." Jackson exhaled. "They said you saved people. For real, that true? Depends who you ask," Ford said. "I've flown a few out of tight spots. Broke a few bones doing it. Got lost once in the Snake River Basin and had to land with half a rotor blade missing. Nobody there to applaud, just wind and consequence." Jackson was quiet a moment. Then, almost in a whisper, he said, "My dad always told me a story. When I was little, said a man saved his life from a helicopter crash in Colorado. He never got the guy's name. Just said he looked like he walked out of a movie, calm as the mountains." Ford didn't respond at first. The silence stretched, not awkward but heavy. Then finally he said, "It's a big country, but sometimes paths cross twice." Jackson swallowed hard. "Was that you? Does it matter?" Ford said softly. "He lived, that's the part that matters." For a moment, the storm seemed 1,000 miles away. The air in the cockpit felt lighter. The silence between them wasn't empty, it was filled with something larger. Trust. Legacy. A line that stretched backward and forward, binding two men by something deeper than name or fame. And somewhere in that silence, a young pilot steadied not just his aircraft, but himself. In the control room, the tension had shifted. Not gone, but quieter, heavier, like something sacred had settled into the corners of the space. The young controller stepped back from his console, eyes flicking to the older lieutenant who had gone silent. That same lieutenant now sifted through a logbook on a nearby desk, flipping pages not with urgency, but with the quiet purpose of a man chasing a name he already half remembered. He paused on a report, yellowed slightly at the edges, the ink faded but still legible. He scanned the page, then slowly turned it around. "Lieutenant Colonel Jacob Miller," he said aloud, "Colorado, March of '94. Survived a crash landing during a snowstorm. Aircraft down near the Gunnison Ridge. Said he was pulled out by a civilian pilot flying a single-engine chopper. No name given, just listed as unidentified rescuer." The photo attached to the file showed a younger version of the man Jackson called his father, bandaged, tired, but smiling weakly into the camera. Behind him was a Black Hawk with a cracked tail boom and mud caked along its skids. The room was still. Everyone turned toward Ford. He didn't flinch, didn't look away. His voice was soft. I told him not to tell anyone. No one spoke, not the colonel, not the techs. Even the wind outside seemed to hold its breath. For a long moment, the past and the present sat together in the same room, stitched across time by a choice made 3 decades earlier. A man who saved a life, a boy who never forgot the story, and a second chance no one planned for. Jackson's voice came over the radio, quieter now. He used to tell me that story every year on my birthday. I never believed all of it, thought maybe he made parts up. Especially the part about how the pilot didn't wait for thanks, just disappeared. Ford didn't respond immediately. When he did, it was barely above a whisper. That's what you do when it's not about you. The radar blinked, steady green. Jackson's aircraft held course, altitude consistent, speed optimal. The crisis had passed, but no one in the room moved. They were watching something more rare than a recovery. They were witnessing a full circle close, not by plan, not by design, but by something deeper. The older lieutenant stepped forward again. You went to visit them, didn't you? Ford gave the faintest nod. A few weeks after the rescue, just to make sure he was healing. The kid, Jackson, he couldn't have been more than 3, gave him a little pilot's pin from my flight jacket. Silence again, but it was no longer awkward. It was reverent. No one said thank you. It didn't seem right. What do you say to a man who saves a father and 30 years later guides his son back from the edge of the same fate? Ford looked at the radar screen, at the blip labeled Eagle 2, still moving, still flying. Sometimes, he said, almost to himself, you don't get to finish something the first time around. And with that, he set the old folder down, gently, and returned his eyes to the sky. The landing zone came into view through the haze, an open strip of gravel and dust carved out at the base of the ridgeline, wind flags whipping like warnings. From the control room, the view flickered on multiple screens, every technician watching in silence, the only sounds the low hum of equipment and the faint whir of the helicopter overhead. On the radar, Eagle 2 hovered at 220 feet and dropping. In the headset, Jackson's breath was steady but fast, like a runner at the final stretch. Ford's voice came through, calm as ever. 120 feet, left pedal. Hold her there. Jackson's hands trembled again. He adjusted, then overcorrected. The wind snapped against the fuselage and the Black Hawk tilted slightly, its tail drifting. I'm losing her to the crosswind, he said, voice tight. No, you're not, Ford replied. She's dancing again, not fighting, just hold. A gust swept up from the ravine below, lifting the right side of the aircraft, the main rotor catching uneven air. The entire bird shifted off axis by a few degrees. From the ground, the med crew scrambled, watching the chopper tilt unnaturally. One of them shouted into a handheld, "Pull him up, he's coming in crooked." But the order never made it to override. Ford's voice cut through everything. Trust yourself, don't react, feel. Inside the cockpit, Jackson fought every instinct to yank the stick. Instead, he let the bird correct naturally. He shifted pressure with his left foot, tiny movements, breathing through each adjustment. And then clarity, the wind pulled back, the skids straightened, the ground rose slowly beneath them. Visual confirmed, said the controller in the tower, half whispering. Landing gear aligned, he's doing it. At exactly 91 feet, Jackson eased off the throttle. At 63, he trimmed nose forward with the precision of someone who had done it in another life. At 28, the wind fought back one last time. Ford didn't speak. He didn't need to. At 10 feet, the helicopter hovered, just long enough to feel the weight of the air surrender. Then the skids kissed the gravel, not hard, not shaky, just contact, a clean, living landing. In the control room, chairs pushed back, hands hit consoles, people exhaled as if they had been holding their breath for the last 30 minutes. A few clapped. One of the junior controllers sat down and wiped his eyes. On the field, the med crew ran forward, but the helicopter door didn't swing open right away. Inside the cockpit, Jackson sat motionless, staring ahead, both hands still on the controls. The world had gone still again. Not silent, just still. Then into the headset, he spoke, voice low, steady, quiet. You weren't saving me, were you? A pause. You were finishing what you started. There was no reply, just a long silence. Then, through the radio, a soft exhale. The kind a man makes when he knows the past has finally closed its loop. In the control room, Ford stood without a word. He didn't look for approval, didn't smile. But as he turned to leave, someone near the door said quietly, "That's the cleanest landing we've had all year." Outside, Jackson stepped out onto the gravel, knees weak but upright. He looked up toward the tower. He didn't know exactly where Ford was, but he raised a hand anyway and held it there. No salute, just acknowledgement. A gesture between pilots, across time. Ford saw it through the glass. He didn't raise his hand back. He just nodded. Once, then turned and walked out of view. The sun dipped low behind the mountains, casting long amber shadows across the airfield. The wind had calmed, but still rolled softly down from the ridgelines, brushing across hangars and antenna towers like a whisper from something older than the base itself. Most of the crew had gone home. The control room was quiet now, empty coffee cups and silent screens, the only proof of the storm that had passed just hours earlier. Harrison Ford stood alone near the edge of the tarmac, hands in his jacket pockets, eyes watching the flight line. Not waiting for anything, just staying a little longer. Footsteps approached from behind, slow and sure. Jackson Miller walked toward him, his flight suit still dusted with gravel, helmet tucked under one arm. He said nothing at first, just stopped beside the older man, looking out in the same direction. After a moment, he reached into his pocket and pulled something out, small, weathered, metallic, a pilot's pin. Scratched around the edges, but still whole. "My dad told me you gave him this," Jackson said quietly. "After you pulled him out of that canyon, he kept it for 30 years, said it reminded him to stay ready, to stay humble." He paused, then extended it forward. I think it's time I carried it now." Ford looked at the pin in the young man's open hand, then at the young man himself. No lecture, no speech, just a faint smile. "Keep it," he said. "Looks better on you now." Jackson's jaw tightened, not in resistance but in reverence. He closed his fingers around the pin, nodded once, and slipped it into his own flight pocket. For a while, neither spoke. Just the sound of wind and the creak of steel from the far fence line. Then, across the tarmac, the unmistakable whirl of rotor blades spun to life. A Black Hawk, newer, sleeker, prepped for the next training sortie. Crew members moved with routine precision around it, running checks, prepping liftoff. But this time, in the left seat, sat Jackson Miller. He moved like he belonged there. Not because he was fearless, but because he'd been through something only the sky and a few men could ever truly understand. Ford didn't wave. He didn't step forward. He just stood still as the bird lifted slowly from the ground, hover steady, nose tilting into the wind. Jackson glanced once toward the hangars as the chopper rose. He couldn't see Ford anymore, but he knew he was there, watching, not supervising, not correcting, just present, like a compass that didn't need pointing. The helicopter banked left, climbing into the open. The sound of rotors faded into the sky. Ford turned then, slowly, his shadow long on the concrete. He walked back toward the hangars, toward nothing in particular. Maybe home. Maybe nowhere. He didn't need to see where the helicopter was going. He already knew, because some things you pass down quietly. Some things aren't taught, only felt. Some things you only understand when someone stays with you long enough to say, "You've got this. Now go," and as the sky swallowed the last trace of the Black Hawk, the screen fades to black. Words appear slowly, not shouted, not proud, just true, because up there we never fly alone. If you enjoyed this story, let us know in the comments, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more inspiring stories.